The count of tells. The way you calculate what each person in the room would need from you if your situation changed tomorrow, and you do it inside 90 seconds. The way your shoulders sit closer to your ears than they did 3 years ago, and you stopped noticing. The way you can walk through an entire day wearing a face that fits the room, and then stand in front of the refrigerator at midnight with no memory of how you got there. These are not small things. These are not personality quirks. And the lawyers, the ones who spend their lives reading documents, passing entitlements, drawing lines between who gets what and who gets nothing. The lawyers are speechless because they have just witnessed something their entire professional vocabulary has no name for. The founder removed his own son from the will, and he named you. Now, I am not talking about a tabloid story. I am not talking about a celebrity family feud, a scandalous probate battle, or a television drama. Strip all of that away. What is actually happening, what has been happening underneath the surface of everything you thought you understood about inheritance, about bloodlines, about who gets the estate and who gets the door, is a legal proceeding that operates on a plane so far above the human courtroom that the earthly lawyers cannot even see the bench. They stand in the lower court, arguing statutes, citing precedent, waving documents, and the verdict has already been recorded somewhere they have no jurisdiction over. And the deed has already been signed over to you. So let us slow this down. Let us speak the way a magistrate speaks when the ruling is irreversible, because what I am about to lay out for you is the doctrinal foundation of everything that is shifting in your life right now. And if you do not understand the foundation, you will misinterpret the building. You will see the transfer of resources and call it luck. You will see the capitulation of your opponents and call it coincidence. You will carry the weight of what has been given to you with guilt, with hesitation, with a lingering sense that you are an imposter sitting in a chair you did not earn, and that would be a tragedy because it would mean you received the estate but never understood the law that delivered it. Here is the first principle. It is the root of everything else, and it is the reason the lawyers are speechless. In high-order esoteric jurisprudence, all physical matter, institutional authority, and generational land are classified as universal trust property. Pause on that. Not your family's property, not the corporation's property, not the dynasty's property. Universal trust property. Which means no human individual, no corporate entity, no biological lineage possesses absolute, unconditional ownership of material assets. They hold them, and this is the word that changes everything, they hold them solely as conditional trustees, subject to continuous fiduciary evaluation by universal law. This brings us to the second principle, the Fiduciary Fidelity Audit. This is the evaluation that determines whether a trustee keeps the assets or loses them. It assesses 3 dimensions. Capacity: can you actually hold what you are being given, or would it crush you? Alignment: are you operating in the frequency of the founder's intent, or have you drifted into your own agenda? And field incorruptibility: can you be bribed? Can you be bought? Can you be turned? Can external pressure destabilize the integrity of what you carry? These 3 dimensions are the entire audit. And the audit produces exactly 2 outcomes. It always produces exactly 2 outcomes. There is no third path. Now, you have felt this. You have felt it in the specific texture of being the one who was never quite included, the one who carried the weight while others took the credit, the one who watched the entitled ones receive what they did not earn and did not steward. And you have asked the question that has no answer in the lower court: why do I work harder, carry more, and receive less? I'm going to tell you the answer, and it is going to feel like the opposite of everything you were taught. That is not a problem. That is the point. The answer is that you were never being evaluated for what you could inherit by blood. You were being evaluated for what you could hold by integrity, and the audit has been running your entire life. The first outcome is the unfaithful or squandered classification. This is marked by 3 signatures. Biological nepotism: the belief that bloodline alone confers authority. Dissipation, the squandering of what was entrusted, whether through indulgence, negligence, or fear. And entitlement, the quiet assumption that the assets are owed, that they belong to you by right of birth, that you do not have to earn them or steward them because they are already yours. When the audit finds these signatures, the outcome is structurally determined. The trustee is stripped of custodial title, and that stripping is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of accuracy. The assets were never lost, they were merely misplaced, waiting for the audit to restore them to the hands that can actually hold them. The son who was removed from the will, he was never an owner, he was a trustee. And he failed the evaluation. That is what the lawyers cannot comprehend. They have spent their entire careers operating on the assumption that bloodline determines inheritance, that the son inherits because he is the son, that the estate passes through biology as if biology were the title, and universal law has just demonstrated that biology was never the title. Fidelity was the title. And fidelity has been transferred. The second outcome is the tested sovereign vessel classification, wilderness integrity, the capacity to maintain fidelity when there is no reward, no recognition, no audience, when the only witness to your conduct is the founder himself, and a zero-density moral record, a record unmarked by the corruption, the manipulation, and the lower matrix compromise that defines the squandered path. The deed is transferred to this vessel. Mandatory asset restitution is executed. And here is the distinguishing feature of this classification. The transfer is not a reward, it is a restoration. The vessel is not being given something new, it is being reconnected to something that was always rightfully aligned with it. Notice the contrast these two classifications force into view. In the first, the heir receives everything and must prove nothing. In the second, the vessel proved everything and received nothing until the audit arrived. The first treated title as a birthright to consume, the second treated it as a burden to carry. That is why the audit's machinery runs differently for each. For the squandered trustee, the audit moves to sever, to break the connection between the name and the asset, to render the bloodline claim inert. For the tested vessel, the audit moves to bind, to seal a connection that was already there, to make permanent what was always provisional. Both outcomes are delivered by the same instrument, but they are not symmetrical. One is a verdict. The other is a confirmation. I want to stop here because there's something in this doctrine that the human mind resists. And I know some of you are watching right now thinking this is just content, dressed up in scripture and legal language to sound deeper than it is. I understand that. I've thought that about videos exactly like this one. I spent 20 years in a lecture hall at the University of Edinburgh trying to make a legitimate case, using legitimate methodology for the idea that certain traditions carried functional technology for navigating the parts of human experience that Western frameworks had no instruments fine enough to measure. And I watched 23 students spend 12 years learning to dismiss those traditions as category errors. Not wrong, simply not real. So I'm not going to ask you to believe what I'm saying. I'm going to ask you to watch what it produces in someone who does. Because the proof is not in the theology, it's in the life. What I can tell you is this. The principle I'm describing is not new. It didn't originate in a YouTube video or a spiritual movement. It's encoded in the foundational legal structures of the West. In 1726, an English court heard a case called Keach v. Sandford. A landlord had left a lease to a trustee to hold for the benefit of an infant beneficiary. When the lease came up for renewal, the trustee applied to renew it in the infant's name. The landlord refused, saying the property couldn't be leased to a minor. So the trustee renewed the lease in his own name. He didn't steal anything. He didn't deceive anyone. He simply took a profit that the beneficiary couldn't legally take. And the court ruled against him. Every penny of the profit had to be given to the infant. The standard wasn't mere honesty, it was absolute loyalty. The court's decision reached far beyond the facts of that case, hardening into a rule that would govern every future trust relationship. The trustee's interest and the beneficiary's interest could never be placed in opposition, under any circumstances, no matter how clean the trustee's hands appeared. The third principle is the one that the lawyers are staring at with their mouths open. It's the revocation itself. When the audit classifies a trustee as unfaithful or squandered, a cosmic codicil is executed. This is the instrument that strips the trustee of custodial title. It's irrevocable. It doesn't require the trustee's consent. Instead, it rests on a different foundation entirely. The founder's original intent, which outranks any claim the trustee might assert. It's executed by the true founder on the authority of universal law, and it's recorded in a registry that no human court has jurisdiction over. And once it's executed, the estate cannot be held by the original trustee under any circumstances. The title is gone. The title is gone. The bloodline claim is void. The biological entitlement is dissolved as if it had never existed. And here's what the lawyers cannot process. The revocation is not a punishment. It's not revenge. It's not the founder throwing a tantrum or favoring a favorite. It's the automatic structural consequence of a fiduciary failure. When a trustee demonstrates that they cannot hold the trust is reallocated. That's the law. It's the same in English equity. A trustee who breaches the fiduciary duty is removed and replaced. The founder doesn't remove the unfaithful servant because he's angry. He removes the unfaithful servant because the estate must be preserved, and the unfaithful servant has demonstrated that he's not a vessel capable of preserving it. Even the language of the ancient accounts carries the same structure of forfeiture and transfer, a pattern written so clearly that no servant could mistake what was at stake. The timing of the revocation is just as decisive as the fact of it. It doesn't wait for the trustee to finish their work. It doesn't pause for appeals. It doesn't accommodate the trustee's schedule or their plans. When the breach is confirmed, the reallocation is immediate, because delay would only endanger the assets further. A trustee who has already failed cannot be trusted with one more day of custody, and the law will not gamble with the beneficiary's inheritance to spare the trustee's feelings. The estate moves on, and the trustee is left with nothing but the record of their own stewardship. That record is the only thing they take with them, and it's the very thing that condemns them. Now here's the verse that the lawyers should have memorized, because it's the exact description of what's happening in your life right now. From the parable of the talents, Matthew 25, verses 28 and 29, "Take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him which hath 10 talents. For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance, but from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath." That's the whole doctrine in 2 verses. The talent is taken from the one who didn't multiply it. The talent is given to the one who did. The one who has gets more. The one who has not, even what he has is taken. Let me translate this into the metaphysical language we're working with, because this is where the rubber meets the road. The unfaithful servant in the parable represents biological entitlement. He inherited custody of a bloodline platform. He inherited the assets, the position, the authority. And what did he do with them? He hid them in scarcity. He buried them in the ground, paralyzed by fear of loss. He squandered them in dissipation. He spent them on the maintenance of his own comfort and status. Or he used them for lower matrix manipulation. He wielded the authority to control, to extract, to dominate, rather than to steward. And the true founder, the universal intelligence, the source of all authority, issues an immediate and irreversible order. Strip the custodial title from the biological line, transfer the full estate to the uncorrupted vessel. The uncorrupted vessel. That's the person who demonstrated multiplier capacity while surviving in the wilderness. That's the person who had nothing, who was given nothing, who was passed over, excluded, bypassed, and who still took what little was placed in their hands and multiplied it. Not for show, not for recognition. In the wilderness, where no one was watching, where no one was applauding, where the only witness was the founder himself. That's the qualification, that's the record. And when the audit finds that record, the transfer is mandatory. The deed doesn't go to the most qualified candidate by human standards. It goes to the tested vessel, and the lawyers stand speechless because they have no category for a transfer that doesn't run through blood. You have a record like that. I know you do. I know it because I know what the wilderness does to a person, and I know the specific texture of the one who comes out of it still intact. I spent 4 years in a rented room in Leith, 1996 to 1999, after I resigned from the University of Edinburgh with 17 years of research in a cardboard box and no one on earth who could explain what I was carrying. And I learned something on that floor that I could not have learned in any archive. The wilderness does not manufacture character, it exposes it. What you are when every scaffold of reputation and reward is removed, that is the raw material the founder has been examining. That is the zero-density moral record. It is not a record of perfection, it is a record of not selling, and the founder has been reading that record your entire life. Even when you did not know anyone was watching, especially then. The test of your entire life has been the wilderness, the exclusion, the bypassing, the watching of others receive what they did not earn while you received what you did not receive. And you interpreted it as rejection. You asked the question that has never been answered at the bottom of every exclusion you have endured: what is wrong with me that I cannot be kept? And the audit was answering a different question entirely, not what is wrong with you. What is in you? And the answer to that question is what has just been recorded in the registry. The estate is being transferred, not because of what you did, because of what you did not do. You did not sell. You did not break. You did not become what the wilderness would have made of a lesser vessel. So now I want to ask you a direct question, and I want you to sit with it before you answer it. If you knew that the evaluation was running your entire life, that every moment in the wilderness was being recorded, that every choice to remain uncompromised was being logged in a ledger you could not see, would you have made a single different choice? Would you have sold out when the pressure was highest, if you had known the test was real? And if the answer is that you would not have, then you already know what the audit found, and you already know why the founder has moved. The wilderness was never a punishment. It was the proving ground. The stripping was never cruelty. It was surgery. And the bypassing, the exclusion, the being left outside the circle while the entitled ones held the center, that was not a verdict against you. It was quarantine. It was the protection of an asset that could not be risked on ordinary entanglements, and it was the calibration of a vessel that could not be completed in the presence of contamination. The wall that held your provision behind a locked door was not built to punish you. It was built because the delivery address was not secure, and the delivery address is secure now. What you are about to receive is restitution, not reward. Reward is given for performance. Restitution is returned because it was held back. And what was held back? The accumulated interest on years of unjust lack, the compounded value of every closed door shut by someone else's fear of what you carry, is now in transit. The escrow has been emptied. The wall has come down. There is a reason the lawyers are speechless, and it is not confusion. It is recognition. At some level, beneath the legal training and the corporate conditioning, they know what has happened. They know that every argument they could make in favor of the entitled son is an argument that universal law has already ruled against. They are standing in the lower court with their standard playbooks, and the playbooks are obsolete because the case has never been about biology. It has always been about fidelity. And fidelity has just been transferred. But there is a question that this entire doctrine raises, and I am not going to answer it yet. It is the question that sits underneath everything I have just laid out, and it is the one thing the lawyers cannot see because they do not know where to look. If the estate is transferred to the uncorrupted vessel, what happens to the vessel's own psychology? What happens to a person who has spent their entire life being told they were not enough, suddenly handed the thing that proves they were always more than enough? What happens to the guilt, the imposter syndrome, the voice that says you do not deserve this because you were never given anything before? That is the next door, and when it opens, I will walk you through exactly what is on the other side of it, because the transfer is only half of the inheritance. The other half is what you do with it. They are standing in the lower court holding instruments calibrated for a different kind of case entirely. A probate attorney reads a will and sees biology. A family trust officer reads a dissolution clause and sees paperwork. Neither of them has an instrument that measures what actually just happened here, because what just happened here was not a legal event. It was a structural one. The trusts did not dissolve because of a drafting error. The heirs did not disqualify themselves through some unforced legal misstep. The mechanisms did not break apart because a document was filed incorrectly. They broke apart because universal law evaluated the trustees and found the custody unworthy of the asset. That evaluation is not something the lower horizontal plane can appeal, because the lower horizontal plane does not even have a category for it. You can watch a man stand speechless in a boardroom and assume he is stunned by the outcome. He is not. He is stunned by the absence of a framework. His entire professional lifetime has been built on the assumption that inheritance follows blood. That assumption just collapsed in front of him, and he has no replacement theory to reach for. Which raises something I have not yet touched. If the lower court has no framework for this transfer, then who prepared the instrument that executed it? Who drafted the codicil that the human lawyers cannot read? And more importantly, if they cannot read it, how will you know, in your own body, when it has already been signed? So when the transfer finally lands, when the estate is actually placed in your hands, something happens that no one warns you about. It does not look like triumph. It looks like a sudden, inexplicable urge to apologize. This is the part that undoes more chosen ones than the wilderness ever did. You survived the stripping, the quarantine, the years of silence. You survived watching other people receive what you were building toward. But the moment the deed is signed and the title is yours, a quieter voice begins to speak. It asks whether you actually deserve what was just placed in front of you. It reminds you of the people who held the bloodline privileges, the ones who were bypassed, the ones who will now have to answer for what they squandered. And that voice has a name. In wealth psychology, they call it sudden wealth guilt. In the tradition I come from, we called it something simpler. We called it the trap. The phenomenon is well documented. A person endures years of poverty testing, reaches a place of genuine integrity, and then, when the resources finally arrive, they unconsciously begin to question their right to hold them, not because they did anything wrong, because the gap between what they endured and what they now hold is so vast the nervous system cannot reconcile it. The mind searches for an explanation, and when it cannot find one, it manufactures guilt. It produces imposter syndrome. It whispers that you are a guest in a room you were actually commissioned to govern. I want you to understand something about that guilt. It is not humility. It is the last residue of the old frequency, the one your bloodline carried, the one that taught you to expect scarcity, to brace for loss, to treat peace as a warning sign. That frequency does not leave quietly. It has one final strategy, and that strategy is to make you feel unworthy of what God has already established. If it can make you feel like a visitor, you will act like a visitor. And a visitor does not steward. A visitor merely occupies. So let me be direct with you. You were not named in that codicil because you won a lottery. You were named because your vessel proved something. Their assets are a commission. They were placed in your hands because you demonstrated, through years no one witnessed, that you could not be bribed, that you could not be corrupted, that external pressure could not destabilize you. That is not vanity. That is the finding of an audit that has been running since before you had language for it. The audit did not measure your charm or your connections. It measured something far more elemental, whether you could hold weight without bending. And you did. This is the distinction that changes everything. A sovereign does not view inheritance as a lucky payday. A sovereign does not view it as a personal trophy to be flaunted. A sovereign understands it as a custodial commission. The resources are not yours in the sense that you may do whatever pleases you. They are yours in the sense that you have been judged worthy to hold them on behalf of a purpose larger than your own comfort. That is the fiduciary mindset. It is the difference between a person who inherits and a person who is entrusted. Inheritance asks what you got. Entrustment asks what you will do with it. And here is where the guilt trap becomes most dangerous. The moment you begin to feel unworthy, you also begin to feel indebted to the people who were bypassed. You look at the disinherited heir, the one who squandered the generational advantage, and you feel a pull to apologize. You feel a pull to explain yourself. You feel a pull to justify why you are now holding what they once assumed was theirs by blood. That pull is not compassion. It is the old frequency trying to reassert itself through the back door. It is the last gasp of a system that cannot survive your stillness. You owe those former heirs nothing, not an apology, not an explanation, not a justification. They squandered their generational advantage through dissipation, through entitlement, through the assumption that blood alone conferred authority. The audit did not strip them because of a technicality. It stripped them because of a pattern. And your guilt will not restore their title. It will only compromise yours. The poverty was not the worst part. The silence was. The sense that whatever ordering force ran the universe had no use for a man who had publicly failed. And when I finally understood what that silence was actually protecting, when I understood that the escrow had been compounding while I sat, the guilt did not disappear overnight. It took a different shape. It became a voice that asked whether I had the right to hold what had been withheld for so long. What broke that voice was not affirmation, it was a reframing. I stopped asking whether I deserved what I had been given. I started asking what I was commissioned to do with it. Those are two completely different questions. The first keeps you small. The second makes you accountable. You do not owe apologies to bypassed gatekeepers. You owe the founder a well-stewarded estate. You do not owe subsidies to family dysfunction. You owe the structure your uncompromised governance. You do not owe anyone a shrink in the boardroom. You owe the position the full weight of your presence. That is the mandate. That is the commission. And let me tell you what happens when you finally refuse the guilt. The old frequency loses its last grip. The voice that asked whether you deserved it goes quiet, not because you argued it down, but because you stopped giving it an audience. And in that silence, something shifts. The estate stops feeling like something you are holding for someone else's approval. It starts feeling like what it actually is. Your assignment, which raises the question I have been circling since the beginning of this. You now know what you are supposed to do with the guilt. You know what the commission requires, but knowing what to do with your hands once they are holding the title is not the same as knowing, in your body, that the transfer has actually happened. The mind can be told, the body has to be shown. And the body has its own way of confirming what the lower court cannot even read. There's a difference between being silent and being strategic, and you'll need to know it the moment the first accusation arrives. Because it will arrive. The bypassed gatekeepers won't go quietly. They'll speak about you in rooms you were never invited into, and their words will find their way back to you through people who claim to be delivering them out of love. to explain, to justify your commission. Resist it. Meet their words with cold, polite neutrality, not anger, not defensiveness. Cold, polite, neutral. 3 words that sound simple and cost everything to execute. You don't justify your commission because the commission was never theirs to approve. It was evaluated and signed by a court that outranks their opinion entirely. It's a test, and the only way to pass it is to refuse to engage it as if it were a debate. This is the moment most freshly elevated people lose the entire inheritance without ever touching it. They don't lose it to theft. They lose it to the second directive, which sounds generous and acts as a slow structural poison. When the unhappy relatives come, hands extended, speaking of what they are owed, what fairness demands, what family means, you'll be tempted to liquidate a portion of the estate to buy peace. Don't. Handing out guilt-based financial subsidies to pacify the disappointed destroys the foundational integrity of the trust. Every dollar you distribute to silence a complaint is a dollar that announces the estate is negotiable, and the moment the estate becomes negotiable, it becomes a target. The founder did not place this weight in your hands so you could melt it down into hush money. That is not stewardship. That's appeasement dressed up as kindness. The trust has one purpose, and it was not written to fund the comfort of people who failed their own audits. Which brings you to the 3rd directive, and this one is the difference between holding the title and actually governing what the title commands. You must enter your newly allocated domain, the company, the estate, the fund, the platform with full executive posture. Stop acting like a visitor. Stop acting like a temporary placeholder who might be asked to leave at any moment. You were not appointed to warm the seat. You were appointed to sign the ledger as the authorized trustee, and the signature only carries weight when your body believes it is authorized. Watch how a person enters a room and you'll know within seconds whether they believe they belong there. The visitor asks permission with their posture. The placeholder apologizes for occupying space. The trustee walks in, takes the chair, places both feet on the floor, and lets the silence settle around their presence instead of rushing to fill it. That is the mandate. That is the commission. 3 directives that sound like advice and function as the difference between a custodian and a caretaker. You were not named as caretaker. You were named as trustee. And the trustee does not ask whether they are allowed to govern. The trustee governs. And once the signature is written, once the body believes it belongs in that chair, the transfer stops being a document and starts being a fact you can feel. That is where this ends and something else begins. Because the founder does not hand you the deed and disappear, he gives you signposts. Physical, visible, verifiable markers that the codicil has moved from the spiritual ledger into your actual life. And when you know what they look like, you stop wondering whether the transfer is real and start watching it lock into place. The first signpost is not in a bank. It's in your spine. For years, most people walking around with this assignment carry a specific, chronic tension in the body, the lower back tight, the pelvis pulled upward, the shoulders doing that slow drift toward the ears. That at any moment, the floor will drop. Now watch what happens when the universal codicil executes. The physical body registers the arrival of long-term security not as excitement, not as a rush, but the opposite. A profound, physical heaviness, a solid, spreading warmth across the lower spine, down through the sacrum, settling into the pelvic floor like a weight that is finally allowed to rest. People describe it as feeling suddenly heavy in the best possible way, as if the body, which has been clenched and upward pulling for so long, is finally permitted to sink. The chronic panic of housing instability, of financial precariousness, of never knowing whether the next month holds, that pressure does not fade gradually. Not through a decision, not through a pep talk, but through the nervous system itself, which has been waiting its whole life for permission to stop bracing. That heaviness is the first signature that the transfer is real. It is the body's confirmation that the ground is no longer borrowed. And here's the strange part, most people miss it. They feel the weight and interpret it as fatigue, or they feel the warmth and dismiss it. But the body is not tired. The body is landing. It has been hovering above the earth for so long, waiting for a surface it could trust, that when the ground finally arrives, the whole structure settles with a thud. There will be more signposts. The second arrives in the behavior of the people who opposed you. And this one is startling to witness because it happens without any effort on your part. No aggressive litigation. No dramatic confrontation. No final argument that convinces anyone of anything. Key individuals who contested your right to authority or resources simply step down. They withdraw formal claims. They offer unexpected settlements, out of nowhere, citing internal exposure they never admitted to publicly. The people who spent years blocking your path do not lose dramatic battles. They quietly fold. One day they are standing in the way, and the next they have left the field entirely, mumbling something about unforeseen circumstances. This is not coincidence. It's the audit's verdict becoming visible in the material world. When universal law reclassifies a trustee, the mechanisms of opposition lose their structural support. They do not fall because you pushed them. They fall because the foundation they were standing on was revoked. The gatekeeper who spent years treating you as a threat suddenly has no reason to keep the gate. The position they defended is no longer theirs to defend. The third signpost is the most administrative, the most bureaucratic, and in some ways, the most satisfying of all. Because the mail starts to show up. Deeds, clear title documents, banking notifications, accounts and properties and positions that had been tangled up for years, the signature nobody could find, the file that got lost, the application sitting in limbo forever, suddenly clear every checkpoint without a single snag, the paperwork that used to take months, that cost you 3 phone calls a week just to keep moving, just moves. Approvals land. The bureaucratic wall that held for so long doesn't get broken down. It gets bypassed, like a river finding its way around an old dam that no longer has any reason to stand. Keep an eye out for this. It's the paper trail of the codicil. The universe doesn't only work in secret. Sometimes it works in triplicate, notarized, filed in the right office, stamped by the right clerk. And then there's the numbers. In the 48 to 72 hours after the codicil executes, you'll start seeing a specific pairing everywhere. Timestamps, balances, document numbers, receipts, 888 and 1111. 888 is the seal of material justice made visible. It's the confirmation that the ledger has been balanced. That all those years of lack, the provision kept from you, the doors closed by smaller men, it's all been accounted for. And the restitution is complete. When you see 888, you're not looking at a coincidence. You're watching the final entry get posted to an account that was left open for far too long. 1111 is different. It releases. Not through a decision, not through a pep talk, but through the nervous system itself, which has been waiting its whole life for permission to stop bracing. That heaviness is the first signature that the transfer is real. It is the body's confirmation that the ground is no longer borrowed. And here's the strange part, most people miss it. They feel the weight and interpret it as fatigue, or they feel the warmth and dismiss it. But the body is not tired. The body is landing. It has been hovering above the earth for so long, waiting for a surface it could trust, that when the ground finally arrives, the whole structure settles with a thud. There will be more signposts. The second arrives in the behavior of the people who opposed you, And this one is startling to witness because it happens without any effort on your part. No aggressive litigation. No dramatic confrontation. No final argument that convinces anyone of anything. Key individuals who contested your right to authority or resources simply step down. They withdraw formal claims. They offer unexpected settlements, out of nowhere, citing internal exposure they never admitted to publicly. The people who spent years blocking your path do not lose dramatic battles. They quietly fold. One day they are standing in the way, and the next they have left the field entirely, mumbling something about unforeseen circumstances. This is not coincidence. It's the audit's verdict becoming visible in the material world. When universal law reclassifies a trustee, the mechanisms of opposition lose their structural support. They do not fall because you pushed them. They fall because the foundation they were standing on was revoked. The gatekeeper who spent years treating you as a threat suddenly has no reason to keep the gate. The position they defended is no longer theirs to defend. The third signpost is the most administrative, the most bureaucratic, and in some ways, the most satisfying of all, because the mail starts to show up. Deeds, clear title documents, banking notifications, accounts and properties and positions that had been tangled up for years, the signature nobody could find, the file that got lost, the application sitting in limbo forever, suddenly clear every checkpoint without a single snag, the paperwork that used to take months, that cost you 3 phone calls a week just to keep moving, just moves. Approvals land. The bureaucratic wall that held for so long doesn't get broken down. It gets bypassed, like a river finding its way around an old dam that no longer has any reason to stand. Keep an eye out for this. It's the paper trail of the codicil. The universe doesn't only work in secret. Sometimes it works in triplicate, notarized, filed in the right office, stamped by the right clerk. And then there's the numbers. In the 48 to 72 hours after the codicil executes, you'll start seeing a specific pairing everywhere. Timestamps, balances, document numbers, receipts, 888 and 1111. 888 is the seal of material justice made visible. It's the confirmation that the ledger has been balanced, that all those years of lack, the provision kept from you, the doors closed by smaller men, it's all been accounted for. And the restitution is complete. When you see 888, you're not looking at a coincidence. You're watching the final entry get posted to an account that was left open for far too long. 1111 is different.